Well, hello, my friends. It's an overcast, kind of rainy day here in West Virginia today, and I've been working my way through all of these emails that I get from all these CEOs from every website I think I've ever clicked on in the last 3 years, who are all sending me all their good wishes and telling me how that they're interested in my health and that they stand behind us and all of that. I mean, I come to the conclusion, I think, that probably that there's a CDC or a WHO rule of some sort that says that anybody that has a mailing list has got to send a message out to their mailing list about coronavirus. And so I wouldn't want to have the CDC police knocking down my newly installed door at 4 o'clock in the morning or something because I didn't keep the rules. And so we'll talk to you a little bit about coronavirus here this morning. Seriously, though, I've had a number of people, quite a few, have contacted me and asked me what I thought about coronavirus and what was going on. And a goodly number have asked me to kind of do a video and kind of summarize some of these things. And so I will do that. So I've called this little summary, it's an op. Op is a term in the intelligence business and the military called for an operation. That this is an operation that has a distinct kind of objective and kind of a strategy, and that's what it seems like to me. And so let me just build the case for you about that. Number one, it's really quite clear that this is an engineered virus. The coronavirus is a bioweapon. It's been weaponized. The first I heard about it was from Sharry Edwards, who's this marvelous woman who's going to come and be a speaker at our transition talks later in the year in September. But Sharry Edwards has developed an extraordinary kind of capability to be able to evaluate things like this from kind of the sound signature of the underlying virus. And what she early on said that this is far too regular for nature. Nature has irregularity in it, presumably, I guess, to deal with multiple kind of situations. And this was very regular, and it had the clear signature of being human designed and human engineered. And by the way, you can find all links to all of these sources that I talk about. I'll put them in the bottom of the description of this little talk. And so she, for early on, figured out that this was really not human made and that it had come from somewhere else and that it was mutating and any number of other kind of things, and it was very kind of useful. And soon behind that showed up Clif High. Clif High from Half Past Human. Again, you can go and look at the link below, but he has gone through the analysis of the underlying organism and figured out that in fact that it was clearly engineered. The coronavirus itself is covering is an outside kind of vehicle, and inside of it is SARS and MERS and HIV, and those three things never show up altogether. And in this particular case, because he's familiar with the CRISPR technology, which does editing, gene editing, and so on, he can tell that it specifically has left artifacts of the gene editing in the organism or in the virus. And so it's clearly an engineered virus. In addition to that, just recently, a report came out on Dr. Boyle, who is was a Francis Boyle, who was one of the leaders within the kind of the bio weaponization kind of space for a great long time, and was the author of one of the major treaties. And he came up and showed that a recently published article in a scientific journal shows conclusively that this coronavirus was in fact engineered. It started in fact back in 2015, and apparently the original kind of cells came from Fort Detrick up here in Maryland, outside of Washington, where the United States deals with this kind of stuff. From there I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where they have a laboratory, a highly secure laboratory where they worked on it. Apparently the Chinese government had put a lot of money into that laboratory and into their programs, which allowed them to put some of their own Chinese scientists on the staff there. Apparently, or so it suggests, is that some of this virus then moved up to Winnipeg in Canada, where the Canadians work on these kinds of things, and then it was spirited out in some way to China, to Wuhan. And the Wuhan facility, which has been well documented and talked about a great deal, is clearly a bioweaponization facility. That's you don't research these kinds of things if you're not interested in trying to weaponize them. And kind of the telltale aspect of this was in the scientific report in this journal. It says that at Chapel Hill at the University of North Carolina, that there was a specific kind of advance that was happened. It's called gain of function, which means that it makes it more virile and more virulent and more effective, and that there was an effort to generate this more virulence there, and so it was clearly kind of engineered. In any case, however it was delivered is kind of uncertain. That's suspicious, to me at least, that it showed up in China and in Iran, and particularly kind of hot spots of this. And we'll talk a little bit about why maybe it showed up in northern Italy as well. But in any case, it's incontrovertible that the underlying kind of organism or the virus has been engineered in some kind of way, and it was almost certainly not an accident. It was not accidentally released, that there was some kind of a plan to all of this. We might talk a little bit about how effective that all of this is. The virus, by the way, has mutated at least, and there are at least 2 versions of it now. Some people report that there might be as many as 5 different versions, and they have different kind of characteristics and different kind of virulence. It's just, and that seems to either be the nature of how these viruses kind of adapt to new situations. Alternatively, it could have been engineered in a number of kind of situations for different kind of reasons, and we can come back and talk about that a little bit. It turns out to be that in any case, as the case is made in a number of situations, and particularly by Clif, these kinds of things are not designed to kill everybody. They're designed to be selective. That's the purpose of the design of these kind of extraordinary kind of weapons that have no reasonable purpose on this planet, by the way. But in any case, in this case, in the case of the coronavirus, it has been far less fatal and significant than you might think. Let me read to you a little bit about typically how many deaths and why human beings die on this planet. And this comes from January and February, the 2 months of January and February of this month, is that there were 2,360 people who died from the coronavirus. We'll talk a little bit more about that. During the same period of time, 69,602 people died from the common cold, from effects from the common cold. 140,500 people died of malaria. Listen, you need to think about this. You need to think about these numbers and the significance of all of this, because what we're going to do is come in and show you that there's an extraordinary kind of effort been put into inflating and firing up and generating all kinds of fear around this. And it's really quite important if you're going to make important, significant kind of decisions about yourself and your family and so on, to have a perspective, have the context, and understand where reality lies here. I suppose this is a good time to also mention that it's hard to know for sure where reality lies, because it's clear that all of the institutions involved, the governments as well as the WHO and the CDC and so on, all have different agendas, and it can be shown rather conclusively that they don't always tell the truth, or maybe most of the time don't tell the truth because of whatever the politics are or other kinds of things. But if you presume that everybody's kind of working on the same database, the alternative would mean that a whole lot of folks have got a secret database and they know what's going on and nobody else does, which doesn't make any kind of sense. But the published things, the published data, we can put it in context because you can relate it to other published data that has been generated. And so that's what we're talking about here. And these are numbers that come out of the CDC. And so there was 140,000 people died of malaria around the world in January. This is not from the CDC, this is from the WHO. All around the world in January and February. There were 198, almost 200,000 people died from automobile accidents. HIV was 250,000 people. 240,000 people died from HIV. This is a time when 2,380 people died from the coronavirus. The differences are extraordinary. I mean, they're 1,000 times in some cases, or at least hundreds of times more. 358,000 people died from alcohol, 716,000 from smoking, 1,000,000, about 200,000 people died from cancer during this period of time. And so the number of people who have died from this coronavirus during this period is minuscule compared to the number of died from other reasons and other sources. In the United States, for the annual data for last year, over 600, almost 650,000 people died from heart disease, and cancer was almost 600,000, and accidents and so on. Listen, I'll put this up and you can take a look at it. And let me see if I can get it to, there we go. You can take a look at it. But anyway, the numbers are just giant compared to the number of folks who have died from the coronavirus. In the big sweep of things, it doesn't even make a difference. There are so many other kind of things that kill people, and so you can have some sense of comfort in the fact that this is not as near as, I mean, you're far more likely to get killed in a car accident than something like this. Obviously, by a factor of maybe 100 or 10 or 50 or something like that. Um, the, the problem is exacerbated because uh, what it's been reported, and it was from reputable sources, is that 80% there are 80% false positives here. That people who might have the flu or some pneumonia or any number of other kind of respiratory diseases get thrown into the kind of the bucket of coronavirus here because everybody's very sensitive to it all. The problem is, I mean, the examples that I can give you is that early on the Chinese were using MRIs as the method to look at the lungs to try to figure out if there were any kind of obstruction in the lungs, and anybody that had any obstruction in the lungs was immediately uh, characterized as having coronavirus. Well, there are any number of things, including the flu and pneumonia and other such things that uh, give the same kind of indications. And so, number one, there are real problems. And I would suggest you go down and look at some of the links that I've given you for Jon Rappoport, who probably more than any other reporter understands kind of the nature and the history and how these pandemics or epidemics in the past have all worked and what has been said about them and what hasn't been true and so on. Take a look at his side. He is an amazing kind of resource in terms of understanding kind of the dynamics of how all of this works. But in any case, there's a real problem with uh, all of the variety of the kind of the testing kind of devices and mechanisms that they have, because in some cases the CDC has even put out uh, testing kits, and they found out that they couldn't tell the difference between water, plain old water, and the coronavirus, and so they had to recall them. And so there's a serious kind of issues about not only whether somebody has it, but then how people are categorized and put in cases, and all these turned into the data, into the statistics that they're all thrown around to justify policy at different kind of levels. And so, uh, uh, so number one is as I already said, it's kind of suspicious, or at least raises questions from a geopolitical point of view and understanding a little bit about the kinds of stuff. When I worked in the White House, one of the things I figured out really quickly was that there was all kind of things going on under the table that nobody knew about. And there's a constant. I once heard the um, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff say, if you don't think we're in a constant war with the Chinese and the Russians, you don't even have any idea what's going on. And which he said to me, by the way. And for most people don't understand that, because all of what ends up in the press has always been sanitized and generated and adapted uh, for distribution. And so now we're at the place where the reported information from China is that this has peaked, and that, as a matter of fact, they said just the other day, today's the 23rd of March, and 2 or 3 days ago they said that they had no new reported cases. There's all kinds of people who argue about that, but the fact of the matter is, if you're kind of working with the same kind of datum of information and the consistency, at least from a source point of view, what the Chinese are saying is that in Wuhan that there are no more new cases, and what you see is that there's similar drop off numbers of other places as well, and in South Korea, and and I believe it's even starting to decrease somewhat in northern Italy, but we'll talk about that a bit. The It's worth talking a little bit about Italy because it's emblematic of perhaps broadly about the situation other places. There are people who are really quite excited about the situation in Italy. It's obviously filling up all the hospitals, and there are all kinds of statistics being run around that say that this is an extraordinary event uh, and it's sweeping the country, apparently. About a week ago, I got a report from the most senior medical officer from the largest military command in Europe. And that report said that almost everybody in northern Italy who had supposedly died from coronavirus, had multiple pre-existing uh, medical problems. That is to say, they were sick, all of them. And since then, the head of the medical or the health ministry there has come out a couple of days ago, and he literally said the number of people who have literally died from coronavirus in Italy is now about two. His quote was literally, "It's about two." And all of the rest of them have died because of complications from pre-existing situations. As it turns out, the average age of the people who have died in northern Italy is 80.3. And what that means is that these are old, sick people who have died, and maybe the flu has been a component, but this is not in that kind of version of this virus. This has not been what we all think and believe that it is, and what it's been communicated to us by the press. The same is the case in, say, Washington State. Bruce Lipton has got a very useful posting that he produced a couple of days ago, which is also in the notes below. And he talked about in 1 week in Washington State, which is kind of a hot spot in the United States, that 5 people had died. And he went on to look at them, and he said they were all in this. I got the sense that it was a hospice plane. They have a trade name for it, but they were elderly people. All of them had at least three pre-existing conditions. 4 of the 5 were over 70 years old, and the one guy was 50 something, in his 50s, and he too had multiple pre-existing conditions. And so you can easily say that if you're sick and if you're old, then of course you're susceptible to any number of these things. It's a function of your immune system and being able to effectively deal with this. The numbers, by the way, are, and this is supported by, this is not me just talking, this is just supported by the data that's coming out of here, is that 80% of the people who are supposedly get the coronavirus or reportedly get the coronavirus have very minor to insignificant kind of sniffles or aches or pains or kind of very light flu-like implications. And so it has no significant effect on that. There's 20% of folks who really get sick. And by the way, I know of 3 people who, starting in kind of December, really got sick with the flu, and it was really tough. A couple over in England, and one friend here in the U.S., and it was a really tough time. And in one case, we was in the intensive care for 4 days. but they got better. But that's part of the 20%, and of that 20%, only a sliver of the folks die, and that is all skewed toward these older people who are already sick. As a matter of fact, the one version or the predominant version of the virus seems to not affect young people, although there are indications now that in New York there are younger people who are being affected, and that suggests that the possibility that it's one of the number of the second or third or fourth version of this mutating kind of vector. The um, the whole situation is complicated by the fact that there is very interesting science that says that the whole new 5G system that is being put in around the world is directly focused, as it turns out, on the immune system and the biological system of humans. You can take a look at the link below, and I very much encourage you to take a look at that. The in that presentation, you will see that the kind of the base frequency of this 5G communications system is 60 gigahertz. And what happens at 60 gigahertz in a very narrow bandwidth is that it affects the blood and the and it eliminates the ability to effectively transmit oxygen into the body from out of the air. There's a mechanism, and you can take a look at it, but it's very well established and scientifically shown that there is this effect. Now, this is a broad-based effect. There are some very interesting pictures on the internet, and I'll try to see if I can find a link to one and put it in the notes before. But I saw one the other day, for instance, of a big tree, and one half of the tree was barren and the bark was falling off, and on the other half of the tree it was all green, and on the bark on that side looked quite healthy. And the gentleman who was presenting this and explaining it said right there, and he pointed right to the top of a street lamp, is the 5G transmitter. And that you have to, and by the way, there's lots of these kinds of pictures about how it's affecting flora of many kinds. And it's really quite clear that there's some significance effect that this frequency has. And what that means is that if you are exposed to the 5G signal for any significant amount of time, is what it does is it reduces essentially the immune system and your ability to combat external kind of threats. That and so it is not therefore surprising that in Wuhan, it was the first place in China where they built out the 5G system, and that Tehran in Iran was where the first 5G system was in Iran, and that Milan in Italy is where the first 5G system was. And so there's a correspondence here, or seemingly. I'm not suggesting, and I've never heard anybody suggest that 5G causes the coronavirus, but what it does is affect the body such that what kind of opportunistic viruses and other such things that there are in the area could very effectively, easily and effectively kind of dominate your system and your body. The That kind of notion is also supported by the fact of the ship that you might know about, something Princess, that where a significant percentage of 280 or something, anyway, a significant number of the passengers all came down with the coronavirus. Well, as it turns out, that ship had been newly outfitted with a complete 5G system. And so what in fact is that if you were on that ship, you were bathed in this, and it was like an island that you couldn't get off of. And the fact that you had an inordinate kind of effect that's far greater than any land, terrestrial kind of situation, suggests and supports the kind of notion that there's an interface here between 5G. And so when you look at kind of the numbers in New York, for instance, where there's younger people who are being affected, it could be because of some 5G effect. It could be because it's a different strain of the virus. It's uncertain. But in any case, what I'm trying to suggest is this is not simple, and it's not and it's far more kind of potentially complex and interestingly complex than it's been suggested in general. There are, as it turns out, a number of very interesting ways in which you can deal with the coronavirus. So there's no reason to get excited about it. There's a lot of reasons not to get excited about this, as a matter of fact, and we'll talk about them here in a minute. But and you can again go to the links down below, and you can see that we have there are. I mean, just kind of walk you down through the list. So if you start with Sharry Edwards, what Sharry Edwards has found and has built a whole institute that's been operating for decades now, and very effectively. She's been named Scientist of the Year by some groups because of the extraordinary kind of work that she has done. And what Sharry Edwards has found out is that this virus, as by the way, many significant diseases or maladies in the body, are sensitive to sound. And so she, working with a composer, has generated a little song, if you will, or a little piece of music that you can download free. You can find it at her website. And if you play that a couple times a day, what it'll do is protect you and reinforce your system. And as it turns out, it works more broadly than just coronavirus. It works for respiratory kinds of things. And I play it a day, once or twice a day. And I can tell you that I've had some sniffles in the past, and they all kind of go away pretty soon after you play the thing. And so there seems to be some correspondence to that. As it turns out, there's a whole lot more that in terms of patients and people that she's been involved in to support the fact that this is really quite effective. In addition to that, she has shown that the coronavirus is sensitive to glutathione and something called quercetin, Quercetin. Again, you can find this in the links below. And if you take this stuff prophylactically or after the fact, that it has significant influence on the effect that the virus has on you. Furthermore, if you go listen to what Clif has to say, he talks about chaga mushrooms and vitamin C. As it turns out, the Chinese figured out really early on that high dosages of vitamin C, and particularly liposomal stuff that goes directly and is about 4 times or 5 times more effective than just taking tablets. But high dosages of vitamin C clearly are beneficial. Also, you can easily, as you can presume from what we talked about in terms of the 5G thing, that the addition of oxygen or oxygen generating kind of interventions can be very helpful as well. Um, but in any case, you can find the links for all of that down below. Now, so uh, just to kind of recap, the likelihood that you can get this, by the way, the use of masks does not protect you from this coronavirus, which is generally transmitted from sneezing and coughing and things like that. What it does is it protects other people from if you've got it. So there's a kind of a mismatch in understanding there, because a lot of people think that they're being protected by wearing the mask. It's not the case. The masks keep you, if you're sick and have the virus, from giving it to other people. The most effective, this is reinforced over and over again, the most effective response to this thing and protective response is to wash your hands, and wash them all the time, regularly. Keep them out of your mouth and your eyes and so on. And so it's pretty straightforward kind of hygiene. This is not high-tech kind of stuff. And by the way, the things I read say that hand sanitizers are not nearly as effective as just washing your hands. Now, there is an extraordinary, so that's the situation. So on one hand, it is growing in some places, like in the United States and other places, but it seems to be peaked and is decreasing in China and other places in the world, and so it's going to run itself out in the not too distant future. This is not existential. This is not, and if you compare it again to the number of people who die from accidents and cancer and heart disease and whatever else, it is really small and minuscule. And so if you can contextualize it that way, there is relatively speaking, it's tough on the individuals who get involved in the whole thing, but relatively speaking, this is not a major threat to humanity or anything. And the problem with that is, and that sets up then the basis for presuming that this is an operation of one sort or another, because the narrative, the message that is being driven and proliferated around the world in a very organized and repeated kind of way is quite at odds with the significance of the actual on the ground significance of what you can see here. And as a matter of fact, what you find is that people like the head of the World Health Organization, WHO, has been caught lying, inflating by a factor of 10 the kind of virulence of all of this, and which he uses as the base of establishing or declaring that it was a global pandemic. And so there seems to be something going on here that is very much at odds with the kind of the reality that's on the ground. And from where I stand, it looks like it it has very clear kind of indication it's being very well orchestrated, that there is an effort to throw fire on the flames of this and make it as big and consuming as possible and drive an amazing amount of fear into the system. The and there are reasons, but we'll get to that and explain what that might mean. But the amount of the kind of businesses that are shutting down and everything out of the fear of this is really out of sync with the reality in very fundamental kind of ways, and that has to make you, or at least somebody like me, question what in the world is going on here. Let me talk to you about and read a couple things to you about some from folks. This is from a doctor and an infectious disease specialist, and he talks about how he's worked in Africa and HIV and AIDS and hepatitis and TB and SARS and measles and shingles and whooping cough and diphtheria and all these kinds of things, and was not afraid about any of those. And he says, and I'm not scared of the COVID-19. He says, what I'm scared about is the loss of reason and wave of fear that has induced the masses of society into a spellbinding spiral of panic, stockpiling obscene quantities of anything that could fill a bomb shelter adequately in a post-apocalyptic world. I am scared of the N95 masks that are stolen from hospitals and urgent care facilities, where they are actually needed for frontline healthcare providers, and instead are being donned in airports and malls and coffee lounges, perpetuating even more fear and suspicion of others. I'm scared that our hospitals will be overwhelmed with anybody who thinks that they probably don't have it, but maybe better get checked, because you just never know. And those with heart failure and emphysema and pneumonia and strokes will pay the price for overfilled ER waiting rooms with only so many doctors and nurses. That basic theme is also a component of a marvelous kind of post that Bruce Lipton put up the other day, and again you'll see the link down below. And what Bruce says is, and he summarizes some of the things of the statistics, and he says, as emphasized in this report, the health of all those that died with coronavirus was already compromised. Healthy people get cold and flu symptoms, while those already sick and near death's door may experience the grim reaper when infected by the virus. True, sick people are more vulnerable to the virus. Healthy people really have nothing to fear. And then he goes on, and this is important. As presented in The Biology of Belief, which was his New York Times best-selling book, stress is responsible for up to 90% of illness, including heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. When an individual is in stress, the release of stress hormones shuts down the immune system to conserve the body's energy for running away from the perceived stressor, the proverbial saber-toothed tiger. Stress hormones are so effective at compromising the immune system that physicians therapeutically provide recipients of organ transplants with stress hormones to prevent the immune system from rejecting the foreign implant. And here's the bottom line from Bruce. The conclusion is clear. The fear of coronavirus is more deadly than the virus itself. That is absolutely true, because not only in terms of the biology and but also in terms of how you act and how you make decisions and how you think about these things. The whole idea of driving fear into this system starts to change the behavior of the whole system, and that I would suggest to you is the most extraordinary kind significance of what's going on here, and which has the long-term kind of from futuristic implications of this. The and let me just kind of give you another kind of angle on how what might be going on here. And Simon Parkes, who's a guy from Britain, who again there's a link to his assessment. What he says is that, for what it's worth, he says that what he believes is that this is a second or third kind of stage of an engagement, interaction with this virus in what essentially is a bio war that's going on between the United States and China. And in particular, which was interesting to me, I mean, I take issue with some of the things that he says, and you have no idea. His father used to work for the CIA, for what that's worth, and you just really don't know what's going on here. But in my business, what you need is permeability, so you can hear the different things and see what comes together. By way of the interview that with Dr. Boyle that I mentioned earlier, who's the administrator and the physician who found the paper, who is talking about the paper that talks about the kind of the history of the coronavirus. That comes from an interview with Alex Jones. And I know that some of you, when I say that word, will completely discount the whole interview just because it came from Alex Jones. I don't agree with what Alex Jones has to say. Alex Jones is freaking crazy sometimes. But the point to this is that if you think that only the things that you think are the sources that you think are credible have all of the information about what's going on relative to this, then you are locked into not being exposed to other things. And so what you have to do is get past the emotions and the stereotypic kind of response that people have to different kind of sources, and you want to listen to what and read and think about what the underlying kind of messages is coming through here. And that seems to be the case. I mean, that's a universal truism, I think, in terms of how you deal with this kind of stuff. And so Simon Parkes, who knows where he comes from, but if you listen to what he has to say, you say, wait a second, that's an interesting idea. And what he says is that there was a time last February in Los Angeles, and I got the link down below so you can see the video, when there was an announcement made that the U.S. Army was doing urban training exercises in L.A. and that there would be helicopters flying. And there's a video of somebody looking down from a elevator building down on the road and watching these Black Hawk helicopters fly into the middle, one at a time, 4 of them, fly into and land down on the middle of the street down below in LA. I mean, this is down in between kind of high-rise buildings. And all kinds of guys with hazmat suits come running out of a building, and they're carrying and bringing what looks like a big insulated container, and they put it into the helicopters and they take off, and the next one comes in and more guys come running out. In any case, something was going on. It was clear that this was more than just some kind of a training exercise, or so it appeared. And what Simon Parkes says is that that was the initial attempt that the Chinese made, that they were going to release this coronavirus, the original very, very, very deadly version of it in Los Angeles. And that we figured it out, and we stopped it, and we captured it, and took it. And he suggests that it was then kind of toned down, and anyway, but it's an intriguing kind of notion that what we're looking at here is part of an ongoing, like I say, this under the table kind of struggle that goes on all the time. And by the way, If that turns out to be the case, if the Chinese were trying to do something to the United States, and as well they might have, because of the kind of pressure that the Trump administration was putting on them from a trading point of view, and trying to shut down their IT company that's doing all this 5G stuff all over the place. It could well be that if the U.S. figured out that that's what in fact was the case, then you'd have a natural reaction to start to squeeze the Chinese somewhere else, and that could help to explain why some of this tension is going on between the U.S. and China that doesn't seem in other kind of conventional kind of terms to justify and have that much significance. And so this whole thing, in terms of trying to make sense out of it and understand what the significance of what it all is and why it's happening the way it is, could very well be part of something much larger, because there's this fundamental mismatch between the narrative and the huge amount of information and the apocalyptic kind of stuff that's coming out, and the reality. The governor of California just 2 days ago said that 25 million people in California could be affected by this thing within the next 2 months. Half of the population of California. Well, maybe or maybe not, but I mean, if you go throwing that kind of stuff around, all you do is you generate a huge amount of concern. And even our governor here in West Virginia is all excited because of what's happening in New York. And those of us who listen to him say, what's that have to do with us? I mean, let me tell you, West Virginia is not New York. But anyway, what this sets up is kind of two scenario trajectories. So let's look at this from a future point of view and try to make some sense out of what's going on here. In any case, clearly there's some intent and there's some strategy behind all of this. You wouldn't go to the effort and plant it the places where you've planted it and other such things, and not have some larger kind of framework about what's going on here. And I've spent a lot of time talking about this and thinking about this and listening to various kind of sources to think about this. And so I've included 2 links down below. And one of them is from David Icke. And David Icke, in his very articulate way, summarizes, from his point of view, the likelihood that this is an effort, the most recent effort of a whole sequence of events that are being driven by the cabal, the deep state, you call it whatever you want, but it's this effort to push toward kind of a one world government and control and large scale global kind of control over people. By the way, there's one variation of that says that maybe it's an opportunistic kind of a target of opportunity that's come with it. Maybe it was plugged into the thing, but there's now a huge kind of sensitivity to currency, to paper currency, to money, and the notion that it helps to spread this kind of stuff. In China, they burned something like 55 billion, I think it was $5 billion worth of currency, because they said that it was, potential kind of vector for distributing and proliferating this stuff. Well, maybe there is this clear kind of direction that's trying to get away from paper currency, go to digital kind of things. ultimately go to blockchain, and in the process be able to control all of the money, and would eliminate, and the governments would have complete ability to decide, turn on and turn off whatever resources and kind of avenues that you might have. Uh, uh, that's not just wild hand waving kinds of stuff. There's a lot of indications that might be the case. But in any case, what I'm saying is that there's one trajectory that says that that this is one way to drive a lot of fear into the system, and in that process, what it does is it brings the economy down, makes things really cheap. Rich people can buy things at cheap. They get more control. It also presents the opportunity for governments to take advantage of this to put into place more restrictive and controlling mechanisms for the people. And so now you see, for instance, that happening. The Department of Justice seeks new emergency powers amid coronavirus epidemic. They they wanted to be able to indefinitely detain someone during an emergency and so on. And apparently they're getting some pushback from Congress, but it's kind of like the Patriot Act after 9/11 is that take advantage of this kind of situation to take it to put in place new policies and new kind of capabilities. So that's one trajectory. One trajectory is that this is one of an ongoing sequence of things, mass shootings, false flags, 9/11, whatever, that are all trying in a large kind of scale to drive the system over toward control of a small number of a small group of people and institutions. The banks seem to be the focus of all of this. There's another trajectory, though, and that trajectory is the one that's kind of articulated by Sasha Stone, and that's again below. And that's in the in the kind of new agey space, or whatever you want to call it, where some of us operate. That started to kind of get traction and is trying to emerge, and it's coming from a number of different directions. That what again, in my business, what you find out is that the indicators start to come from different places, and then they kind of cluster, and pretty soon you get a critical mass, and that is almost the indicator, the precursor that's pointing toward what's coming downstream. In this particular case, what the narrative is that there was this effort to use this event to increasingly dominate the system, and the Trump administration has captured it and is now using it for beneficial things. Now, number one, whatever you think about Donald Trump, and boy, there are clearly two different camps on this issue. There's one thing you got to admit is that unlike any president, certainly in my lifetime, this is a man who has worked on delivering what he said he was going to deliver, point after point after point after point. I remember once seeing an interview in the White House with Steve Bannon when he was there, and he had a big whiteboard behind him, and he had listed every promise that Donald Trump had made, and they were systematically going down to deliver on every one of those promises. Now, one of this, and all you got to do is how kind of resilient he's been against all the fight against him building a wall in in Mexico, and you know that this is a guy that doesn't give up. I mean, he's pretty hard over on all this stuff. Well, one of the things that he said over and over again in his campaign, that he's going to drain the swamp, right? He's going to get rid of a whole lot of the stuff that's going on underneath the whole system that has generated so much problems in this plan. Well, if you so the basis of this other trajectory says Trump has gotten a hold of this thing, and he is going to use it to drain the swamp, and he is going to use this, and it has already started, is what they say, is that there are all kinds of arrests being made all over the place. Arrests for what, you say? Well, pedophilia and other such things. There are hundreds of people being arrested, apparently, reportedly, for being associated in pedophilia, which is a huge, huge problem, by the way, that runs through all the leadership of the government and the media and any number of other kind of spaces, judicial system, and so the way this narrative goes is that he is going to use this whole effort to take advantage of that when the system is upset, to move at a time when it would be easy for him to move on some of these things that he's been holding in abeyance and building the case for over the years. Now, and so if you think of those two trajectories, what you see is that they both are based upon some kind of major disruption of the system. In one case, it gets hijacked by the good guys, if you will. In the other case, it continues. But in any case, there's huge kind of disruption because you can't accomplish what either of these parties wants to accomplish without significant disruption of the status quo. So all you got to do is look around the country and the world, for that matter, and it's pretty easy to say to yourself, "Golly, they're shutting everything down. They're shutting down. You know, you can't. I mean, there are states that are completely on lockdown for the next 2 weeks, and it hasn't happened in West Virginia yet." But they certainly have gotten rid of the restaurants and other kinds of things. They're getting rid of the nightly television shows. You're getting rid of the social media. You're shutting down the ability of the kind of the lower level of the system to not only have information and knowledge about what in fact is going on, but also to be able to react to it, because they're essentially in the dark, if you will. What they're doing is shutting down the lights, and so shutting off the lights, and then they'll make, and then presumably, whether on one side or the other, they're going to make their move, whatever it is, during the period when there's the least kind of illumination on what they're doing. So let's you know, if you had to ask me, we're sitting here on Monday, the 23rd of March, and I'd guess within the next week that they had effectively shut down the whole country, essentially told everybody to stay in for the next 10 days, and generated a huge amount of fear about this coronavirus. But that's not the objective. The objective is to keep people in, you know, turn down the lights, turn off the lights so they can't see what's going on, and to move on something. In either case, wherever this is going, and so it's a good idea to kind of prepare appropriately, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But what happened? So the kind of what this raises is an interesting kind of point, because people are starting to talk about this, some of the press and the business press and everything, but for common people, for most people, it is the downstream implications of what are going on here are not clear and obvious at all. They have got them focused on this coronavirus thing, and they are fixated on that and do not see the bigger picture, because let me tell you what the bigger picture is. The bigger picture is that no matter which vector that you go out on this thing, the economic implications are huge. They're just profound. And they are long and they are lingering, because what we are doing is effectively shutting down the economic system. And they're doing. I mean, let me tell you, uh, the last Friday, this was from yesterday, when Goldman Sachs predicted a 24% drop in the second quarter GDP in responses we were frankly shocked and wondered who would have the guts to come up with even a more apocalyptic prediction. Well, just 48 hours ago, none other than the Fed's James Bullard has literally swept the analyst field with a forecast that, if accurate, would mean nothing short of civil war for the United States. This is the Federal Reserve, the head of the Federal Reserve, or one of the chief guys in the Federal Reserve. So he warns of unemployment may soar to 30% and the GDP crash 50% in the second quarter of this year. Let me see if I can get that to where there you go. So, and you have other, just from the Atlantic, says we can't say we're in a recession yet, not formally, but we're experiencing so much that a black swan, it's a flat financial plague or something. The headline of this one, it's not a recession, it's an ice age. Not a recession, but it's an ice age. I've got a link to an article or a piece by Martin Armstrong, who's an extraordinary kind of economic forecaster, the best in the world by far, who has written a letter to the president, about a 3-page, 2.5-page letter to the president, saying essentially you're killing somebody to cure the disease. What he is highlighting is the fact that there's this fundamental mismatch between the response relative to what seems to, what it apparently is the problem, and that's what sets up and convinces me at least that this is an op. This is some kind of an organized thing that's going on, because there is not internal consistency between the two sides of the equation that's going on here. And so the economic implications are the things that are going to hurt the most people by far than what's going on with the virus. And so the question is, how do you get out of the back end of that thing? Here's the point about Goldman expecting a 24% crash in the second quarter. So, I mean, that's huge in one quarter, to take a quarter or even a 30 or 50% out of the 50% out of the GDP of the country. It's amazing, and all you have to do is look around at these huge companies like Boeing and others in the travel space and so on that are just really in great trouble. And it's not the big ones. It's the little ones. It's the little guys who are operating right on the margins all the time, and they don't have the resilience and they don't have the resources in order to stay alive in the middle of all of this. That's where it's going to hurt. And what it's going to do is not only economic in exclusively economic terms, but the effects from all of the stress and the health and whatever and marital and familial problems are really going to be huge. This is and so we'll come here and we'll talk about this in a second about, so how do you get out of this? But This is the story. The story is not about the coronavirus. This is a story about the collapse of a global depression and the collapse of the economic system. There is no way you back yourself out of this. This is past the point where this where you could ever fix it because you've shut so many things down, and we're kind of right at the beginning of the shutdown period, and so it's going to go on for who knows 2 or 3 weeks or something like that. And so what's happening is that you're starting to get the government starting to figure out, everybody's screaming in the business community, particularly the big ones, and in the travel and hospitality business. And so they're all screaming for the government to give them money and to bail them out, as it were. And the government's economic stimulus is set to balloon so quickly into a $1 trillion bailout in the coming days, which will be the largest rescue in modern American history. Instead of the banks, this time we're dealing with major industries. They're screaming loudly to the Trump administration and Capitol Hill for aid. Vast portions of the economy have been undermined by this coronavirus scare, which the press has turned into a financial pandemic when the number of deaths are under 8,000 compared to 1 million annually between just smoking and the flu. And so there's something extraordinary is going on here, obviously, and the effort in kind of large scale terms is some kind of a reset. We're in the middle of this we're in the beginning of what is going to be a huge kind of torquing and reset of the whole system. Now, let's say look at what comes out of the back end of those two kind of vectors, those two scenaric paths. So if this is an effort by the deep state to try to solidify and capitalize on this whole thing, then their objective is to drive it down into a depression for a period of time, consolidate the whole thing, buy a bunch of stuff cheap, whatever it is, put in new policies that will provide more control over the top. And this is a pretty kind of dystopian and negative kind of scenario, obviously. The other side, though, has an interesting kind of possibility associated with it. So if in fact this is a cover for a big, large-scale kind of cleaning out of the system. I mean, there's been something like almost 300 arrests in the leadership of Saudi Arabia in the last week. You walk your way around the world, there's a lot of kind of indicators that saying weird things and strange things are going on that are not, that are significant enough not to kind of be just usual stuff that happens. So if we run ourselves up this Trumpian reset kind of notion, and you turn off the lights and they go off and grab a bunch of people, and when they turn on the lights again, then what you find out is that it's really kind of a different world that's shown up, because there's a lot of players that aren't there anymore that used to be. I mean, this is a scenario, so it's kind of notional, kind of, but just think about this kind of possibility. There is a path on the back end of this one that starts to show up in some of the reporting that says that part of this reset that Trump would try to generate and is trying to generate would be some fundamental kind of structural things about how the United States works, including, some major change in the existence of the function of the Federal Reserve, the possibility of eliminating income tax, they are resetting the currency of the United States. There's a bunch of big, deep kind of things here, and so follow me here. Yeah, if in fact you were using this as a cover, and you were and under that space, you were able to initiate the efforts to pull the pins on some of the major things that have supported the way this world has worked and this country has worked for so long, then what would come out of the back end of this thing potentially is a kind of a new world. And it could, and depending of, and there's talk about this, and it's been for a long time under different kind of rubrics and kind of, but one of the issues that keeps coming along is the idea that there will be eliminate all debt. So there would be this jubilee that would eliminate all debt, so everybody starts out clean again, and that you may have noticed there's been increasing kind of calls from presidential candidates and others for universal basic income, where everybody gets $20,000 a year or whatever it turns out to be to help cover all of their things. Anyway, there's the possibility here, the very interesting possibility here that you could rapidly reset this system, and what would come out of this thing is this kind of new world. It'd be tough in the short term, but you could see that it was going to operate differently, that there was a liquidity enough that was coming out of the government in terms of helping people, and not just companies, but people, and that the structure had changed enough that you could see that there was a whole new kind of approach. So I mean, think about kind of from a social psychological point of view, what it would be like if suddenly that it was decreed that all of the educational loans were eliminated, right? All of your mortgages were gone. All of these kinds of things as part of this giant reset. I know it sounds fantastic, but God, we're in a fantastic kind of situation here. This is craziness. I mean, I'm blown away by the surreal nature of it all if you sit and look at it in a systematic kind of way and an ongoing way. And so you can't discount this. I mean, the alternative isn't a lot of fun, and so we might think about these kinds of possibilities as being an option, because those of us who play in this space and writ large are convinced that there's a new world that's emerging out of this, that this is the transition and the torquing of the whole system that is going to allow the emergence of a new world. Well, the emergence of that new world certainly doesn't come out of the scenario where everything goes into a huge depression and nobody gets out of it, and it's more oppression is part of that. Now, there's a new world that this other transit, you may not like Trump, and all that kind of stuff, but the status quo is not very immediately supportive of this new world. So there is believe me that there are a whole lot for a long time, there have been a whole lot of talk and a lot of activity, let me tell you, a whole lot of activity on certain aspects of redoing the currency and thinking about some of these other kind of issues, and even putting in place some of the executive decisions. Trump has put a number of them for being able to go out and not go out after pedophiles and so on, and attach all of their assets. And so, I mean, there's, you don't know for sure. But when you look across this, this is not about coronavirus. This is a bigger kind of operation going on, and it's either going on and it's going to go one way or it's going to go the other way, and either Trump will persist and sustain himself or not, and so we'll see. What does it mean for all of us? It's an opportunity. I mean, it's interesting. I ran into this story of It says, after an outbreak of the bubonic plague, the University of Cambridge closed its doors for 2 years. Isaac Newton had completed his degree, but his academic career was put on hold. So he retired to a small farmhouse where he developed calculus, optics, and gravitational theory. Some of Newton's most profound work came from his own quiet period. In the same way, now is your opportunity. There's a lot of good things that could happen, and a lot of contemplative and kind of internal kind of work that we can all do to think about kind of the larger picture about who we are and where we're all going. With a little more kind of levity, there's some writer here, contemporary writer, writing for McFeely's, which is a humorous publication that I subscribe to, wrote a so-called letter from F. Scott Fitzgerald, who was quarantined in 1920 in the south of France during the Spanish influenza outbreak. He writes, and understand this is made up, but it's great. Dearest Rosemary, it was a limpid, dreary day, hung as in a basket from a single dull star. I thank you for your letter. Outside, I perceive that what may be a collection of falling leaves tussling against a trash can. It rings like jazz to my ears. The streets that are empty, it seems as though the bulk of the city has retreated to their quarters, rightfully so. At this time, it seems very poignant to avoid all public spaces, even the bars, as I told Hemingway, but to that he punched me in the stomach, to which I asked if he had washed his hands. He hadn't. He is much the denier of that one. Why, he considers the virus to just be influenza. I'm curious of his sources. The officials have alerted us to ensure that we have a month's worth of necessities. Zelda and I have stockpiled up on red wine, whiskey, rum, vermouth, absinthe, white wine, sherry, gin, and Lord, if we need it, brandy. Please pray for us. So, anyway, there's another way. Another way that we can all look at this, and so I think that this is kind of like being a Boy Scout, and that we all need to kind of be prepared, and we need safety first, and wash your hands a lot. And all I can tell you is that we're prepared, and we're going to be ready for this one. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you again.